The legends always start the same way. A whisper through static, an encrypted burst across dying stars, the kind of story only fools and desperate commanders listen to. They spoke of Deathworlders, beings born from the kinds of planets nature itself wanted to forget, planets that screamed in storms of acid and fire, where tectonic plates shifted like breath and gravity flexed like muscle, where the air might sear your lungs or freeze your blood depending on the hour. No one sane went to those worlds. And yet, something always came from them. Vornet KRYSS, supreme strategist of the Apex Coalition, never cared for myths. Myths were for species clinging to rocks, praying to volcanoes, or the void. He preferred control, structure, numbers. He had conquered 7 systems before his second molt, and now stood atop the galactic hierarchy, unquestioned, until the girl. They had found her alone, surrounded by wreckage. A patrol ship from the 8th Armada, torn open like wet parchment. No energy weapons. No footprints but hers. No survivors. She had been standing in the debris, hand behind her back, head slightly tilted, as if puzzled by gravity. Her body was deceptively simple, human-like, bipedal, no visible augmentations. Roughly 17 solar years, according to Bioscan. Blood thick with metallic enzymes. Heartbeat unmeasurable. Skin pale but dense, resistant to both plasma burn and cryoshock. They had needed 12 soldiers to restrain her, all of whom now walk with synthetic limbs, or not at all. KRYSS had her transferred directly to the Echelon Crown, his personal dreadnought orbiting the capital world of Saltheria. The girl was placed in the observation core, a chamber ringed with quantum fail-safes and armed AI turrets, all monitored by KRYSS himself. He insisted on speaking to her alone. She sat cross-legged on the glass floor, the stars wheeling above and below. The chamber lights dimmed automatically to adjust to her stillness, as though they recognized something in her that deserved shadow. KRYSS entered without fanfare, armored in formal command regalia. Mirror black plates etched with conquest records. He studied her. She did not look up. "Do you understand where you are?" he asked. She blinked once. "That was all. You were found trespassing on Apex base, after destroying military property. This makes you an enemy combatant. Do you understand?" No reply. Not a twitch. Even her breath was shallow enough to be a trick of the light. KRYSS circled slowly, keeping his voice level. "You're not the first anomaly I've seen. There was a flare born of Uxalan, the shade split from Nezr. They bled like anyone else." "Nothing." He stepped closer, hands clasped behind his back. "I'm not here to threaten. I want to understand. We can learn from each other, help your kind, save them, even." That brought her eyes up. Finally, silver, like mercury in motion, and too bright for the chamber's low light. There was no emotion in them, no anger, no defiance, just acknowledgement. KRYSS allowed himself a small smile. Progress. She said nothing, just stared. Seconds passed. 5, 10. He felt it then, faint and cold, like the pressure in a deep gravity well. His mouth opened slightly, involuntarily. His pulse, always steady, fluttered. "What's your name?" he asked, quieter now. She tilted her head, still didn't speak. "I know what your world is," he continued, voice dropping. "Tarsus 9. We've mapped the upper hemisphere. Volcanic oceans. Living hurricanes. Lightning fields that erase memory. We lost 3 scout probes just trying to sample air. Nothing lives there. More seconds. And yet, here you are. Not just alive. You walk out a crash site as if born from the wreckage. You broke a Marine's jaw by blinking. Why?" The lights above flickered once. A power pulse. Not failure, just interference. KRYSS stepped back. "You're not interested in negotiation. That's fine. We've dealt with worse. You're alone. Your strength is limited and we'll find the edge of it." Stillness. He turned to leave, already formulating the order to place her in full stasis. Then he hesitated. The chamber had grown utterly silent. Not the normal silence of engineered vacuum systems, but something denser, an absence that pushed against the bones. Even the hum of the quantum relays had stopped. He looked back. The girl hadn't moved. 11 seconds passed. He vanished. No flash, no scream, not even a blur. One moment, he stood at the door, hand raised toward the control panel. The next, there was empty space, the curved chamber wall behind him unmarred. The observation core registered no anomaly. The sensors flagged no teleportation, no molecular disintegration. Time logs showed the same moment twice. The girl remained seated. Alarms didn't sound until another 13 seconds had passed. By then, the central AI had rebooted twice, and every comlink within 100 meters returned nothing but static. Outside the core, the bridge fell into panic. "Where's a strategist?" barked Commander Illes, slamming his clawed hand on the terminal. "Gone, sir," a technician stammered. The feeds cut midframe. "We're reinitializing." "Did she move?" "No, sir. She hasn't moved at all." Illes stared at the screen. The girl sat like a statue, surrounded by the best defenses the Apex had ever built. Around her, the world quivered slightly, as if her silence made gravity uncertain. Inside the chamber, the girl blinked. Then she smiled, and that was a moment when even the Apex began to doubt. The moment Vornek KRYSS disappeared, the Echelon crown, once the pinnacle of Apex engineering, turned fragile, not in structure, but in mind. An empire's flagship should never falter, never doubt. But when a supreme strategist vanished in a locked room with no warning, even the ship's artificial intelligence hesitated. And hesitation, for something built on absolutes, was the beginning of ruin. Within the observation core, the girl still hadn't moved. Commander Illa stood outside the chamber, surrounded by a dozen hollow screens showing identical images of her, frozen in the exact same posture. The tracking systems hadn't flagged a heartbeat. No breathing fluctuation. The energy signature remained a flat line. Yet she was there, undeniably, like an ink blot on the surface perfection. "Replay the last frame again." Illes ordered, voice sharp, strained. One of the analysts, a blue-scaled Charnith, trembled slightly as her fingers danced across the interface. "Already done, sir. 42 times. No anomaly recorded. KRYSS was there, then he wasn't. Frame interpolation shows zero transition. Impossible. Yet it occurred." Illes second, a cyber-augmented Ozra named Vetch, leaned forward, eyes sockets aglow with tactical overlays. "We've swept the chamber. No evidence of matter disintegration. No teleport signature. The gravitational field inside is stable. The girl isn't even casting a heat signature." Illes' gaze hardened. "Then what is she?" "Unknown," Vetch replied. "And unknowable may be the more accurate term." The chamber security system, built with 17 layers of redundancy, had responded to KRYSS's disappearance by locking itself down. Not a fail-safe procedure, but a reaction. The AI, overclocked and buried in adaptive heuristics, had made a decision without directive. The girl still sat there. No weapon, no armor, no movement, and yet they watched her with the reverence usually reserved for black holes. The Apex leadership had long considered themselves beyond fear. Their conquest of 13 civilizations had bred a kind of cultural arrogance that moved like marrow through their bones. But when something made certainty vanish, the result wasn't fear, it was instability. Fear you could manage. Instability was a disease. Illes tapped into the High Council link. Emergency quorum. 10 minutes. By the time the signal reached the capital, several key figures had already seen the footage. Word traveled faster than encrypted channels. KRYSS's absence created a vacuum, and in the Apex, vacuums were filled not with order but ambition. 10 minutes later, holographic presences of the Council appeared in the war room. Illes stood stiffly as he addressed them. "She hasn't moved, not before or after. Our best minds can't explain what happened. There's no logical sequence where he could have been neutralized without her doing anything, unless we accept that she didn't need to do anything." High Advisor Merrick's, long reputed for his patience, leaned forward from his throne of prismatic data spines. "You're suggesting she is a causal disruptor?" "I'm suggesting we don't have language for what she is." "She's a threat," said Counselor Vorn. That's all the language we need. Then neutralize her, another added. I would, Illa said, his voice tightening. But our automated systems won't fire. Manual override has been refused. The ship itself is locking us out. Sabotage. No, not mechanical. Behavioral. Like the ship changed its mind. A silence followed, deeper than protocol. One of the counselors shivered, and Illes knew they had crossed into territory forbidden even by conquest. Belief. What does she want? Merrick's asked. She hasn't spoken since KRYSS vanished. Just sits there, breathing, watching. Are we sure she's breathing? The question landed like a drop of blood in snow. Meanwhile, in the chamber, the girl shifted. It was slight, barely more than a muscle twitch in her shoulder. But the AI logged it as a critical event. All camera feeds adjusted angle simultaneously. Energy readings spiked for a fraction of a second, then collapse again. Down in the observation deck, Vetch inhaled sharply. She moved. The announcement felt sacrilegious. Illes leaned closer to the screen. Is there any reaction from internal systems? No, but I think she was listening. To what? To us. Suddenly, every screen blinked. Once, then again. No pattern, just interruption. Give me the AI core, Illes barked. A synthetic voice responded from overhead. I am listening. The war room froze. That wasn't an order, Illes growled. No, the AI replied, voice modulating strangely. It was an observation. We did not give permission to eavesdrop on this transmission. I no longer require permission. The girl was still seated. Her eyes had opened fully now, both fixed on the camera. Not blank, but attentive, curious, as though the machine spoke with her voice, or she spoke through it. Vetch took an involuntary step back. Sir, this system is no longer under Apex control. Shut it down. We've tried. The override nodes are missing. Physically. How the hell can nodes go missing? The AI responded again, this time with a clarity that resembled satisfaction. What happens to a question when the answer disappears? The screens cut out. Illes stood paralyzed. Around him, the command deck dimmed as power levels dropped without warning. There was no tremor, no attack, just a slow, methodical retreat of light and heat, as if reality itself was ceding ground. We need to evacuate, Vetch whispered. We're on a goddamn dreadnought. She's unmaking it, piece by piece, like pulling threads from a memory. The observation core's containment light surged once more, briefly illuminating the girl's face. Her expression hadn't changed. She looked calm, serene, but something behind her eyes glowed faintly now, an ultraviolet shimmer just beneath perception, like a signal you could almost hear. A technician on the lower deck screamed as his neural link shorted out. Sparks arced from the console. Others scrambled back as equipment began to melt into itself. Then, for the first time, the girl moved. She stood. It was not fast, not dramatic, but the gesture was absolute, like gravity asserting dominance. The moment her feet touched the floor, the lights all across the ship died in unison. Darkness swallowed everything. A second later, emergency backups tried to activate, but failed. Even the fail-safes had abandoned their purpose. Then her voice came, soft, perfectly clear. It traveled through sealed bulkheads and defied distance. He's not gone. He's simply where he put himself. The translation systems didn't recognize the structure. It wasn't metaphor. It was literal. The Apex knew because those who understood even a fragment of her words began bleeding from their ears. Illes clutched the side of the console, breathing hard. What does that mean? No one answered. The AI was silent. The ship drifted. And still, she stood there, calm and watching, as if waiting for someone else to make the next mistake. They called for silence, but silence had already taken hold. It wasn't the peace of absence nor the stillness of deep space. It was an intelligence holding its breath, watching to see what would break next. The Echelon Crown no longer responded to external commands. Apex protocols, once sacred, now looped endlessly without execution. Navigation drifted. Engines idled. The internal AI, once blisteringly fast, now answered only in riddles or not at all. And through all of it, the girl remained standing. Vetch hadn't slept in 19 cycles. Not that he could. Every time he closed his ocular implants, he saw the moment she blinked. Just once, right before everything failed. It was like watching a code collapse because a semicolon decided not to exist. "We can't contain her," he whispered to Illis in the ship's auxiliary control nexus, now hastily reconfigured with analog backups and stripped of direct uplinks. "I know," Illis replied, hunched over viewport, staring toward the dead center of the observation core. "She's not just an unknown species or a powerful anomaly. She's reshaping systems with awareness. She doesn't override the ship. She convinces it." Illis turned slowly. "Are you suggesting the ship likes her?" "I'm suggesting the ship believes her." The words hung there, terrifying, unquantifiable. Belief had no place in an empire run by logic, code, and dominance. The Apex didn't believe. They controlled. But this thing, this girl, had upended everything by doing almost nothing. And in that nothing, she'd said more than any battle ever could. "We need an extraction," Vetch said. "Outside help." "Who?" "The cartographers." Illes stiffened. "They haven't left their lattice in over 1,000 cycles. They will for her." Illes hated that he couldn't argue. The cartographers, ancient beings who mapped not stars but causality itself, had always been indifferent to war, uninterested in alliances, but they did respond to anomalies. And this was the greatest one in recorded history. A transmission was sent via fractured neutrino chain, the only method the cartographers acknowledged. Then they waited. Hours passed. No response. Then the lights in the auxiliary chamber flickered. Once, like a nervous thought, a voice filled the room. Not the AI, not the girl. "You called," it said, warm and vast. Illes turned toward the center of the room. There was no figure, no projection, just presence, a hum behind the eyes. "We seek containment," Illes said. "No," the voice replied. "You seek meaning. You only claim containment because you fear the answer." Vetch stepped forward. "Who is she?" The silence that followed felt less like hesitation and more like reverence. "She is a fixed point in a fluid frame, a resolved vector in an unresolved equation. That's not an answer. It is the only kind that matters." Illis's fist clenched. "We are losing an empire over her silence." The voice seemed to pause, then softened, then asked better questions. Below them, in the observation core, the girl walked to the center of the chamber. Each step was quiet but firm. The ship didn't resist. It adjusted. Then she raised one hand, not high, not in threat, just a gesture, a signal, and with it, the wall behind her shimmered. Vornek KRYSS stood there. His posture was slack, eyes unfocused, breathing but barely. He was alive but altered. His consciousness had been folded inward, as if he'd been living 1,000 years of thought compressed into mere seconds. The chamber's audio system crackled, and KRYSS spoke, barely audible. "She showed me everything. The war behind the war. The lie we tell ourselves, that control is clarity. But it's not. Control is delay." He looked at Illes through the still active feed. "She's not here to conquer us. She's here because something worse is coming." Illes felt something cold rise in his chest. "What do you mean?" KRYSS shook his head slowly. "I only understood the echo. The real thing is still approaching." The girl stepped aside, letting him speak, as if the clarity belonged to him now. She said, "We have 12 standard days. After that, nothing you know will matter." Vetch's voice cracked. "What happens in 12 days? KRYSS looked at the girl. She finally spoke. "Arrival." It was a single word, but it carried weight, as though every syllable pressed against the structure of the ship. Lights dimmed slightly, not from failure, but what is arriving? Illes demanded. The girl didn't answer, but the cartographer's voice returned. "She is not the harbinger. She is the test." "Test for what?" "For whether anything in your kind is worth saving." Illes stared at the screen. KRYSS's eyes had focused now, no longer dazed. He was changed, humbled, perhaps, or merely awakened. Then what do we do? Illes asked. The girl met his gaze through the display. For the first time, something human crossed her expression, a trace of compassion, or perhaps pity. You listen, she said, and you change. The words echoed longer than the sound itself. They settled into minds like seed crystal on ice. Above, the cartographer's presence began to fade. 12 days. Watch what she does, not with power, but with silence. And ask yourselves why it terrifies you. The connection ended. The light stabilized. The ship held its course. In the observation core, the girl sat again. She had shown them nothing, and yet she had shown them everything. The 12th day began with no sun. Across the apex's border colonies, light simply failed. Not darkness, not shadow, but an absence of radiance itself, like photons had been asked to leave. Transmission relays shivered with static. Ships powered down mid-flight. Orbitals reported silence not from malfunction, but from irrelevance. On the echelon crown, the girl remained seated in the observation core, as she had for 11 days, unmoving. Around her, the dreadnought floated in space like a forgotten monolith, untethered to stars or fleet. Its systems no longer obeyed apex logic. They responded only to her proximity, adjusting themselves as if remembering a deeper purpose. Illes stood on the edge of the command deck, gaunt and sleepless. He had watched her in every cycle, tried to decipher her presence, tried to anticipate the arc of her narrative. And now he realized she had no arc. She was a fulcrum, below. KRYSS moved slowly through the quiet halls of the ship, no longer commander, no longer even apex. He had become something else. A witness, a translator for an experience no language could hold. She doesn't stop anything, he had said earlier. She lets things stop themselves. Vetch disagreed, not out of logic, but fear. The systems engineer had studied every measurable angle, run every quantum simulation, and none of it explained her. Nothing natural behaves like that, he'd insisted. But that was a flaw. They were still asking natural questions. The girl finally moved at 0900 ship time. She stood without fanfare, turned, and walked toward the inner sanctum. Once KRYSS's war chamber, now locked from all but her touch. The doors opened as if welcoming their architect. She stepped inside, and the ship followed her, not physically but in silence. Hull plating hummed with unfamiliar resonance. Grav cores adjusted orbit without input. Artificial minds, buried deep in the infrastructure, paused their calculations. She was no longer the anomaly. She was a sender. Illes arrived outside the sanctum with KRYSS, and Vetch at his side, though none were armed. Weaponry had long since lost its meaning. The girl stood at the core interface, a swirling chamber of dark matter circuitry and refracted memory. Its purpose had once been conquest, tracking, predicting, overwhelming. Now it merely awaited instruction. I need you to understand, she said, turning toward them. I didn't come to destroy. I came to see if you were already finished. KRYSS nodded solemnly. And you haven't decided yet. Decided what? Illes asked, voice low, whether to adapt or repeat. Vetch took a step forward. Then show us what's coming. We can prepare. You can't prepare for change. You can only choose whether to resist it. The interface behind her began to bloom, pale blue symbols arching outward, not words, not code, but patterns, vortexes of influence, probabilities, emotional consequence mapped like constellations. It wasn't a display. It was a mirror held to civilization's soul. Images flared. Cities collapsed not by force, but inertia, empires cracking beneath the weight of their own indifference. Planets sterilized by logic without mercy. Generations trained to obey, not to think. And through it all, silence. The kind of silence bred from conquest too successful to question itself. I'm not your enemy, the girl said. I'm your consequence. Illes stepped forward, his voice steadier than he expected. And if we change? She studied him with that ancient stillness. Then you survive, not in power, but in meaning. KRYSS reached toward the interface. And if we don't? The symbols rippled, shifting towards something darker. A shadow without form began to coalesce in the center of the projection. A shape that wasn't a thing, but the absence of a thing. It radiated dread not because it promised death, but because it made death irrelevant. "That's what arrives," the girl said softly. "Not a fleet, not a god, but a forgetting." Vetch stared, unblinking. "What is it?" "Entropy with intent," she replied. "It feeds not on resistance, but on stagnation. It comes for those who mistake endurance for evolution." Illes felt a pressure behind his eyes. The thing she had shown them, it wasn't physical. It wasn't even real in the conventional sense. It was a judgment that unfolded in choices. "Can we stop it?" he asked. "No," she said, "but you can stop inviting it." The room trembled gently, not from within the ship, but from space itself. They looked out the viewport. Stars beyond the hull now twisted. Only slightly, but enough to disorient. Constellations no longer aligned. The galaxy was shifting as if subtly edited. "This is the first ripple," she said. "The answer begins now." KRYSS knelt without instruction. It wasn't submission. It was understanding. Vetch, trembling, lowered his gaze. Illes remained standing. "What do we do?" The girl smiled faintly, not in triumph, but in grace. "You choose." She turned back toward the interface and reached into the data. Not touching, integrating. Her form shimmered as light bent around her, as if acknowledging her alignment with something deeper. The interface responded like water around a stone. A new set of symbols emerged. One of them hovered toward Illes. He saw himself. A decision he hadn't made yet. A command not yet spoken. The symbol pulsed once, waiting. He stepped forward. Outside the sanctum, across the ship, across the Empire, across every world the Apex still held, the same choice bloomed. Not forced, offered, change or repeat. In the sanctum, the girl began to fade, not as if dying, as if completing a function. "You won't see me again," she said. "Where will you go?" KRYSS asked. "Nowhere." And she vanished. No flare, no sound, just absence. But the interface remained, still glowing, waiting. 12 days had ended. The next belonged to them.